Welcome out, everybody. This is going to be week 4 of Veterans Voices. Um, I'm really happy with the progress you all are making on your work. I am going to share some tips and tricks for writing more effectively. As we get a little further in here and start to work on the portfolio, um, this is designed to help you sort of meet my feedback a little bit with regard to the feedback that I've been offering. Um, Now, do take a look at that announcement that I posted, sort of what my shorthand feedback really means. I have been starting to leave a little bit more voluminous feedback on later papers just to try and um, make sure you're feeling like you're learning a little bit more. Now that you're getting closer to that portfolio, I want you to have some concrete understanding of what you can improve about a paper, so that you don't feel like you're not learning enough in that regard. Um, that said, this is not a grammar class, so I'm not going to be focused primarily on grammar or spelling. There are very simple tools that you can use, like spell check, grammar check, to improve that kind of writing. What I'm more interested in is how you're developing ideas, how you're engaging in thoughtful argument, how you're integrating your sources. So, um, just like last time, I'm going to combine our sort of housekeeping call with the lecture. So there's just one unified call. It's less to click on. I think it makes more sense to do it that way. So I'm going to share my screen over here. All right. So you should be seeing this screen. Yeah, I see you seeing it. Okay. So, um, for week 4, we're talking about intersectional identities of veterans. We're going to cover an exploration of what intersectional identities are, and how they affect veterans in particular. And we'll talk about how those identities influence their expressions and their activism. Reading assignments, I want you to read chapter 4 of Tribe, Calling Home from Mars. That's all about veteran reintegration, so it's a very interesting chapter. Also, the postscript, so that you can read both of those. There is also an excerpt from the book Prisoners After War that I would like you to take a look at. Specifically, I'm going to have you dig into chapter 5 on Generation 9/11. And the reason that I'm having you focus on that chapter is just because that's kind of the focus of our class right now, is focusing on that particular generation of veterans, the GWAT veterans. So I want you to take a look at this. These are the most common veterans that you're going to start running into in the VA, simply because this conflict is now in our rearview mirror, and those veterans are the most in need of help. Um, as with um, as with previous mentions, one of the biggest struggles that you will note with those soldiers um, is mental health problems. But you're also going to learn about bad paper discharges and the impacts of incarceration and those kinds of things. I do recommend that you pick up um, Prisoners After War. It's a really great book that I reviewed for the Journal of Veteran Studies. I also posted my review in case you're interested in what a good review would look like. I'm calling my own review a good review, but uh, it's a review that got published, so any review that gets published can be a good review. So there's that. I also want you to watch the LGBTQ webinar benefits and services for LGBTQ veterans. Do note the date of this, 2023. There have been significant changes in veterans benefits since this video was released, specifically for this population. So don't take everything that you see there at face value. I wish a lot of it was still the case. Some of it is not. So I want you to pay attention to what may have been affected by recent policy changes at the VA under our current administration. Um, Also for our writing, we're going to do a critical essay on the intersectional challenges faced by a specific group of veterans. You can choose which group of veterans you'd like to cover. And then if you would like to, you can start working on either a creative project or a portfolio. The portfolio is going to be a portfolio of your coursework that you've done for the class. I want to see all coursework from the class in that portfolio. You can revise any papers there to receive a letter grade increase in your score. You can also write a reflection to be included at the start of the portfolio. This will reflect, and it's the only original piece of writing for the portfolio. This letter will reflect on your learning in the course and the reason for the revisions you've decided to undertake. And it should be not just because Dr. Albright said so. So there's that. I would also, the creative project here is in place in case you feel like you don't really need to revise any of your papers. I want to give you room to create a creative project instead. So if you're in that mood, we can collaborate on what you think that should be, but also, you know, just let me know. The way to turn in the portfolio is to give me the link to the site that you created on. So that can be, a Wix site or a WordPress site or whatever kind of website you can create. I want the link. The link is what you will turn into me. And it'll be the same thing with the creative project. It needs to be on the web somewhere so that I can access it and look at it and give you a grade on it. So these are sort of a big project in the course. So be paying attention to that. And certainly feel free to ask questions. I've been responding to some questions about the poetry reviews or revisions or comparisons that you've been doing for week 3. So I am fielding questions, I think, pretty quickly. So do keep those coming if you do have questions. There is not a assignment sheet for the creative project. Originally, I thought about cutting it, but because I've had so many people do really well on the papers, I wanted to give you something that you could work on instead of the portfolio if you wanted to practice that creative project. So if you do not want to do this, you do not have to do this. But if you don't do this, you have to do this, right? If you don't do this, you have to do this. All right. Questions on that? You can email me if you do have questions. All right. I will stop my sharing now. And I'm going to go over just a few things here that I think might be helpful to y'all as you're working through these next parts of the class. And part of this is just from reading your writing and wanting to give you a little bit more feedback on how to improve things. Some of you have begun to receive some of this feedback. So I just want to give you, something to work on. So for starters, a lot of you have started off your topics with kind of a cliche at the beginning, or a generic opening like "since the beginning of time," right? Instead, I'd like you to ground your hook in the theme of what you're writing about. You can use a striking quote or a relevant statistic about a veterans issue. You can pose a provocative question or frame a question that whatever your source is addressing. But try to connect to the audience's purpose for reading what you're writing. If you're writing a veteran-focused audience, briefly, you should signal why your paper is going to matter to that audience, right? And then you can unwrap that as you go along. But your claim when you're writing these, so what you're claiming should be something that you could drop the mic on and say, okay, I'll explain this later, but this is the truth. And you can drop a truth bomb for that hook. And that should be somewhere in the first paragraph, just to get people involved and wanting to read more. All right. Once you do get people hooked, they're going to want to know when you're switching between topics. So each paragraph, a paragraph is roughly 5 to 6 sentences. Each paragraph should have transitions between them. And you should use conceptual bridges instead of words like additionally or moreover or next. So, for example, while the first chapter explores reintegration challenges, the second shifts to the psychological toll of isolation. That signals to me that you're switching from the first chapter that you were covering this one thing to the next chapter that's focused on the other. And that should be the first sentence of that new paragraph. You can also echo key terms. So if a term is significant that is found in your source, you can echo that or rewrite it or paraphrase that from a previous paragraph just to sort of bring home how it's related. And you should also signal if you're going to be using contrast or continuity. So use a phrase like, in contrast to X, or building on Y's argument, and that will help clarify the relationships between two disparate ideas. All right. As you're writing, try to create some parallel structure in your comparisons, especially with the critical essay on intersectional challenges this week. I want you to really focus on, okay, I have a standard vet here, and I have a veteran who has an intersectional identity. Okay, when I'm comparing and contrasting, I want you to keep the structure convenient. So a weak comparison might be something along the lines of author A argues for systemic reform while author B believes in individual resilience. Instead, you might say author A argues for systemic reform, author B argues for individual resilience, right? It's a little bit different, right? Uh, and you should balance the complexity. If one side of the comparison uses a subordinate clause, mirror that in the other for clarity and rhythm. All right. So keeping that parallel structure can really help, in your comparisons. Um, so there's that. Um, Citation tips. So everybody should be citing work whenever you're quoting. If it's got a quote, it needs a citation. Um, you should follow whatever your target journal style guide is. There is a target journal for y'all. That's going to be the Journal of Veteran Studies. I am an editor over there, and I'm familiar with their style. So if you're writing to match that style, I'm I'll be able to detect that. So they publish in APA format. I don't mind if you use MLA, but do note that when you're writing your book reviews for Journal of Veteran Studies, they are going to copy edit you into APA style. You can cite specific quotes sparingly, but quote strategically. So use really short, impactful quotes rather than long passages, and then summarize whenever it's possible. All right. So when you're citing, you should be citing because the author put it in such a way that it's better than any way you can think of to state that certain point. All right. So, for example, Mark Twain said, "What gets us into trouble isn't what we don't know, it's what we know for sure that just ain't so." Now, Mark Twain's quote there is so compact, so brief, and so impactful that, and it's in his own style, his own authentic style, that it really belies any kind of summary that I could possibly come up with. Now, I could start to explain that what he's talking about is people who are really confident, who get us into trouble, whereas um, people who are humble generally make better decisions. But that's not nearly as impactful as Twain's quote. So in that case, if I wanted to make that point, I would just quote Twain for that. All right. So that's when you want to make that quote, and make sure that you're giving me for APA style. I want the when you're introducing it, you should have a quote burger, right? So the quote burger is I'm introducing the source. So I would say in Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain writes, and that's the introduction to the quote. Then you have a quote that's the meat of the quote burger, and that's just the quote. And then the bottom bun of the quote burger is the summary of what the quote means in the context of your paper, right? So I can't just drop a quote in and then not explain what I'm talking about. Instead, I should drop a quote in and make it relevant to the argument that I'm making and spell out exactly why I use that quote. In APA style, you're going to want to use page numbers. When you introduce the source, you're going to want to put the year in parentheses that that source was published. And then that's going to help readers verify what you're claiming, and it's going to add credibility to your paper. All right. You could also reference the author's credentials, especially if those credentials are very impressive, right? So usually when people reference my work, they say Dr. Albright. They don't say that Tony Albright guy, right? So you should briefly note the author's background when you're introducing that author for the first time in a paper. Um, for a book review, you'll have a whole author review section that you should really refine and get polished really well. And that should be before any of your analysis of what the book is talking about. So also do make sure that you are looking for a book published by a veteran that you can review for this upcoming assignment. Prisoners After War is a very good book, but it was not published by a veteran. So you can't use that one. And you can't use Tribe, but I think, and Warrior Writers, but I think everything else is on the table. So books like Stephen Russell's Troublemakers, you could do that one. Um, oh, there's a lot of them. Yeah, I'm not going to give you a comprehensive list on this lecture, but there are just a lot of veteran books that you can look for. Blue Ear Press has a lot of really good books. There's one called Touching the Face of God. That's a really good one. Um, and there are book reviews already on the Journal of Veteran Studies for books that you could look at, but you don't want to write a book review for one of those that has already had a book review, because Journal of Veteran Studies is the one that you're going to be submitting publications for. So if we've already published a review on that book, you can't use that one either. But they are good for finding different publishers like Blue Ear or Middle West Press that are veteran authored. All right. So those are some of my sort of tips and tricks for improving your writing. To recap those, you want to craft a strong first paragraph hook. You want to improve your transitions between paragraphs by referencing what the last paragraph said and speaking to what the next paragraph is going to say. Create parallel structure in your comparisons. So if I say author A says this, author B says this, I want to say it in kind of the same way. And then citation, just make sure that you're citing sparingly, quoting strategically, and using quote burgers for each of your quotes. All right. Okay. So we're going to move on to our material then. So week 4, intersectional identities of veterans. Our theme is going to be how race, class, gender, sexuality, and other identities intersect in the lives of veterans and shape their activism and expression. So today we're exploring that intersectionality in the context of veterans' lives. So intersectionality means looking at how multiple identities like race, gender, class, and sexuality interact to shape someone's experiences. So by the end of the session, you should be able to define intersectionality, apply it to veteran experiences. You should be able to analyze how these veterans influence their activism, how these veterans' identities influence activism and expression, and then connect these ideas for your upcoming assignments. So when you hear the term intersectionality, what comes to mind? You might be thinking about overlapping identities or hybrid identities, multiple forms of discrimination, perhaps, or the complexity of a social or self-identity. Intersectionality as a term was actually coined by Kimberly Crenshaw to describe how race and gender intersect in legal cases. So just like a lot of our theory in veteran studies, this comes to us from another discipline, in this case, law, right? For veterans, this concept helps us understand why experiences differ across groups. So think about a Latina veteran who's also a single mother. Her challenges are going to differ a lot from those of a white male veteran because of how gender and ethnicity and family roles intersect. All right. So how might a Black woman veteran's experience differ from that of a white male veteran? Well, for starters, they might face a greater risk of discrimination in VA services, right? We don't have a big discrimination against white males in this culture, right? It's just not a thing that happens. Now, people have said that there is this kind of reverse racism tide that happens, or they're combating wokeness. But we're just looking at what actually happens in real life. And in real life, Black women veterans are at greater risk of discrimination in VA services. There are different cultural expectations around their military service. And the potential for compounded trauma from racism and sexism is there. So in this case, being a Black woman is an intersectional identity that exposes this veteran to a lot more difficulty than somebody who is not routinely discriminated against for race or sex. All right. So these are things that we should think about when we're thinking about people's intersectional identity. Another intersectional identity might be a Native American male, right? When I joined the military, I am Native American. I'm a Choctaw veteran. My drill sergeants all expected me to be this super Indian, right? This super scout who could run out into the woods with buckskin pants on and come back with a cabin, right? It was ridiculous. And if they had ever thought to just disentangle their views from what they had expected, they might have arrived at something reasonable, right? But I was at greater risk for racial discrimination because of the way they had been conditioned to view my particular race. All right. So as we think about those things, Asian American soldiers faced a lot of racism in the COVID-19 pandemic when people were telling them to go home, and a lot of them were from here, right? So it's a really insidious thing, and all of these intersectional identities play a role in who we see ourselves as, and then how the society sees us, and what that means when we combine it with something like a veteran experience or an incarcerated experience or both. That can be really a defining feature of our personality that is, in fact, something that we have no control over necessarily. So as we're thinking about intersectional identities, that's what I want to think about is how does this particular mix of identities This group of groups, how does that affect what we're seeing in VA services, what we see in our service, what we see in interacting in everyday life? What kinds of risks are we exposed to? What kinds of extra things or cultural expectations are we forced to confront because of these intersectional identities? So let's connect this with some case studies from our readings and our viewing. In Tribe Chapter 4, Calling Home from Mars, the big focus is on alienation after service, difficulty reintegrating into civilian life. So veterans develop this military identity, right? They go to basic training and they have imposed on them quite a few new cultural norms, right? For starters, when you go to basic training, you're often there with people from across the nation, from very different regional cultures. And those regional cultures have to combine very quickly in order to operate in a basic training unit. Um, I had in my basic training unit a man from New York who would say "thun" after a lot of things, and he was saying "son," right? And it was a colloquialism specific to his dialect that was like "dude" or "bro" or whatever, right? So if if he had continued using that and I didn't make an attempt to understand what he was saying, that might have created a communication barrier between us. And then uh, we wouldn't have been able to operate as a unit. At the same time as this dialect leveling is going on, um, we're also having new vocabulary impressed upon us. Um, and this new vocabulary comes to us from the IET training manual, from the drill sergeants, from all kinds of sources. We're learning all of these new terms, all of this new vocabulary. And it gets ingrained because it's important for us to know, right? It's important for us to know what mount training is, what a hooch is, what an MRE is, what PT is. These are all things that it's really, really important for us to know in the process of trying to integrate into military life. Um, at the same time that's happening, the command language imposes a new grammar upon us. Instead of saying go to the position of attention, like we would in a normal prestige dialect of American English, we say position of attention, move, right? And that's not any kind of grammar that I'm familiar with, right? That is particular to the military, right? So we're learning dialect leveling, we're learning new vocabulary, we're learning new grammar. And on top of that, we have new pronunciations coming to us from the radio operator's handbook. Things like how do you pronounce numbers and letters on the radio? So we learn the phonetic alphabet, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, right? And so on, right? So those are our new ABCs. And on top of that, we pronounce the numbers on the radio with a slight southern drawl, which is something that we can talk about later on. But it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And it's see, it already made me slip back in. So we're learning this completely new way of being, and then we go in this state of being to places that civilians don't ever go, right? Most civilians live and die within 5 miles of where they're born, right? Um, we go to all these crazy places speaking this crazy dialect, and then when we come home, it's like coming home from Mars. Nobody tells us how difficult it's going to be to come home and find out, oh, well, while we were gone, the Walmart closed and the Kmart no longer is there, and Our favorite restaurant is gone, and we merged with the school down the street, and so now our school mascot is gone. And all of these pieces of our childhood, all of these pieces of our identity are erased. And what's left in place is this new alienated identity that we have to live with for the rest of our lives. So it is like calling home from Mars because we have a lot of difficulty reintegrating then into civilian life. Now, some veterans do it more successfully than others. Other veterans really struggle with this. A lot of them end up homeless or unemployed for a long period of time. If they have the benefit of being able to live with their parents, a lot of them will go and live with their parents for a time while they find work and reintegrate. And it's just a really sad state to come back from. And you combine that with other marginalized identities that are less marginalized actually in the service because we're all trained to sort of look and feel and act alike. Um, and it really becomes an incredibly difficult thing to overcome. In the postscript and in Prisoners After War, we see incarcerated veterans facing stigma and systemic barriers, right? So, incarcerated veterans being veterans who go to jail after having been to war, right? Um, and it's really that's part of the difficulty in reintegrating into civilian life. A lot of veterans who get caught up trying to get back into civilian life, they end up falling out, right? Because they get incarcerated. They make a mistake they can't come back from. And now all of a sudden, they don't have the opportunity to even try to reintegrate into civilian life because they're reinstitutionalized. And they're learning a lot of those same things incarcerated that they did while they were in the military. In many ways, that reinforces their isolation and makes it even harder to come back. In the LGBTQ rights webinar, uh, it's all about VA benefits for LGBTQ veterans and a lot of the ongoing challenges that they face with discrimination. Um, these have gotten worse in recent years. So I want you to pay attention to that when we're exploring the intersectionality of these identities, and pay attention also to the sort of um, actions that these veterans are taking in order to try to not only reintegrate but reintegrate while authentically remaining themselves. Many of them have struggled with not being able to be themselves because of policies like don't ask, don't tell, or the mass discharge of LGBTQ veterans from the military and sort of the implications of that. Um, and the discrimination around their readiness or their unit cohesion or their ability to serve. So as you read and watch those materials, I want you to think about what intersections stand out to you as really most detrimental. There are the LGBTQ veterans facing both homophobia and the veteran stigma. And then there are also racial minorities struggling with access to mental health care. Um, Incarcerated veterans struggling with access to education and the ability to use their veteran benefits. How do these identities then shape their activism or their silence? Some veterans become better advocates for policy change, but others avoid activism altogether in fear of backlash or re-trauma, right? So we we really should think about again not only what intersections stand out, but then how those identities shape either their activism or their silence. Now, intersectional identities do influence how veterans express themselves and how they uh, engage in activism. Veterans express identity through memoirs, through art and advocacy, through uh, all kinds of different ways, through storytelling. Um, and intersectionality often shapes what stories get told and which voices are amplified. Activism can be really empowering, but for marginalized veterans, it's often also risky because they're outing themselves every time that they come out to try to embrace this expression of their intersectional identities. So think about this. Along the way, how does a veteran's intersectionality affect their ability to access resources or advocate for change? We've talked about some programs that really help veterans, um, but each of these programs is designed to help a different problem, often a different um, stigma that is associated with veterans and not necessarily connected to a specific veteran's pathology, right? So a transgender veteran might avoid VA services due to fear or discrimination. A Native American veteran might face cultural barriers in mental health programs. Um, all of these are valid experiences that are the result not of anything in the control of the veteran necessarily, but in things that they're not in control of. Things like their race, things like their gender identity, things like their sex, um, things like their income level when they come out, and their support system when they come out, and their religion. These are all things that can affect the intersectionality of a veteran and the identities that they have, and then the discrimination that they face. All right. So to connect these to your assignments, in the critical essay, we're choosing a specific group like the LGBTQ veterans or Native American veterans and analyzing their intersectional challenges using course materials. Um, so for this assignment, as we're doing this, and it's 4 to 5 pages, that's fine. It's double spaced, headed, uh, properly sourced. Um, as we're doing this, I don't want you to just tell me all about Native American veterans that were in those sources, but rather choose one specific group and then analyze their intersectional challenges. So I might say, okay, here are my Native American veterans. Here are the challenges confronted by all Native American veterans. Um, Here's what's specific to them culturally, artistically, health wise, background wise. Here's what's peculiar to them as veterans. Here's their character of service. Here is the likelihood of their cultural identity to be brought up in conversation. Here is, just sort of disentangle the veteran from all of the intersectional identities that might affect them. And then once you have that proper profile of who they are and what particular challenges they might face, I want you to talk about how that can be combated by people who are working with veterans. All right. So you all are planning to work with veterans or have entered this class because you think it would be interesting to work with veterans. So I want you to not only analyze the intersectional challenges that they're going to face and use the course materials as evidence for that, but then also propose solutions to those things that you're going to be facing. The portfolio, do look at the due date. It isn't due until sometime in September, right? So I want you to, for this portfolio, reflect on your growth. Do make revisions. and talk about how your understanding of intersectionality, as well as other veterans issues that we've been talking about, has evolved over the course of this class. And then for the creative project, if you choose to do the creative project instead of the portfolio, I want you to showcase identity intersections through art, poetry, multimedia, and think about how to represent complexity either through some kind of visual art that you do or narratively. If you do visual art, I do want you to create an explanation for that art. You could create like a cover letter that goes along with the art, as well as some kind of explanation of your art. But that creative project, again, that should only be undertaken if you don't want to revise your previous papers for different grades. So I'm expecting to receive maybe 4 or 5 creative projects. The rest of you probably should be doing the portfolio assignment. All right. So intersectionality is essential, absolutely essential for understanding veteran experiences. It shapes our access to resources, it shapes our activism, it shapes our identity expression, and it shapes the ways in which we express our need to connect back with civilian culture. It's really important for us to think about what's going on with the intersectional identities of veterans so that we can begin to understand what's going on with each particular veteran as we go along. I'm not telling you to racially generalize veterans, but rather I'm thinking about sort of codifying in a way how we approach our care for a specific veteran population. All right. Next week, we are covering veterans in modern social movements and media. We're going to cover veterans' involvement in modern social movements, including things like anti-war, demining campaigns, and then we're also going to talk about representations of veterans in media and popular culture. So things like our favorite movies and all of that. But do be working on that portfolio. And you can start finding your books, finding your veteran authored books for the book review assignment, because that's going to be a really important part of this class. And one of the really most beneficial assignments that you'll do if you want to pursue further work toward a higher degree in academia. Writing as often as you can in academia is absolutely 100% vital, right? And even if you're not planning to continue on in academia, it's nice every once in a while to publish a paper and keep your skills honed. So I encourage you all to treat that assignment as if it's coming tomorrow, because it's coming up quick, and it can be really difficult to both get through the book and then write a coherent review on it. Do look at the review criteria that are outlined in the submissions page for the Journal of Veteran Studies. And again, if there are any questions, feel free to email me. All right. Thanks for coming to this lecture. I've got one more, and then we're done. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure working with you all. I hope we continue having good conversations.